So welcome to today's episode where we're shining a spotlight on the Twinkl Originals team, the creative minds behind the storybooks used in classrooms around the world. We'll be exploring how these stories are designed with all learners in mind, and in particular how they can support children with English as an additional language. From the power of illustrations and storytelling to the exciting introduction of wordless books, we'll dive into practical ways educators can use these resources to inspire confidence, build vocabulary, and spark a love of reading. Let's get started. Hi, Twinkl Originals team. Hi, Emma. Hi, Pete. Would you like to introduce yourselves to all of our listeners?
Hello, I'm Emma Fitzgerald. I've been at Twinkl for over 10 years now. Before that, I was a TA and a nursery assistant and a teacher. And then outside of Twinkl, I work at a youth club for autistic teens and young people. And at Twinkl, I work on the Twinkl Originals books, and I take care of the books for children from birth up to 7 years old. So mainly focused on picture books. And I'm here with my colleague, Pete.
Hello. So I'm Pete Lambden. I do a very similar job to Emma at Twinkl, but I focus more on the books that are generally aimed at slightly older children, or depending on children's reading levels, that more dense with text, more in novel and sort of short novel format. Equally, I also used to be a teacher. Most of my experience was in Key Stage 2, but I have also been involved with teaching children to read from an early age in quite a few different areas. And one of the schools I was at did have quite a lot of EAL children coming through our doors. So I've a little bit of experience there as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So to start with, what inspired the creation of the Twinkl Originals books, and how do you decide which stories to develop?
So I've been working on Twinkl Originals a little bit longer than Pete, so I'm going to take the lead on answering this one. So the main driver for us is to create books that children want to read. That's the most important thing. Our books are primarily about reading for pleasure. We want to make books that the children will find entertaining, maybe funny, maybe a little bit scary. We really want them to enjoy the experience. We know, like data shows, that the more children enjoy the experience of reading, the more they're likely to become lifelong readers. We know the long-term impact that being a reader has on their ability to access all of the curriculum as they grow older and make their way through primary and then secondary school, and then really on their future success. So for us, the motivation to read, the enjoyment, is the key thing for originals. A really key part of it also is we really are passionate about making the books inclusive. We want to make the books a mirror for children to see their lives reflected, but also have that window for children to look into other lives and really develop that empathy, that understanding, just exposing them to experiences of other people's cultures that they might not have, for example. And our story ideas, they're based on a lot of things. Sometimes that can be what our customers are searching as well. We're really lucky, I suppose, that we have a huge sort of data bank at our fingertips where we can see what are teachers and educators looking for, what are they interested in, what are they not finding at the moment, and we can then work to fill those gaps. If there's a particular topic that teachers are looking for, we might think, well, a book would really help to bring this to life. This could make it more accessible for children, perhaps. And our books, I suppose, they're created by teachers, so they are primarily designed with learning in mind, learning in different areas. From developing, every book really is about developing a child's love of language, but also, as I was saying, like a fiction book might help children to understand a particular period in history more than they might from just hearing the facts. Potentially we want them to be immersed in that world and bring it to life, really.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Anything to add, Pete?
I was just going to say, when we come to looking at how to decide the stories, that can be quite entertaining and fun from our end, because it involves taking a lot of what we see as ex-teachers from our own experience, but also talking to working teachers and stuff like that, but also trying to keep one eye as well on the kind of commercial landscape of books and stories, seeing kind of what's popular out there, so that we're balancing everything with which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot in the coming questions, but balancing everything with this idea of making it engaging for the children, but also tying into what educators want as well.
Yeah, that's it. It's about those wider questions, and like pre-teaching and things are really good for English and additional language learners. So with the bank of resources that surround some of these books as well, we're really, really lucky to be able to tie it all together. So how are Twinkl Originals books designed to support with English as an additional language? Is there any features or anything we can look out for?
Yeah, I think the main thing that comes out immediately from kind of all of our books is the way we try to make them vocabulary focused, and that's right from birth. So the originals range is vast. We go right from like first word type picture books, and in those ones we do try to design them in such a way. I mean, this with everything from Twinkl, it's not kind of just about the content, it's about the way it's designed as well. We've got really talented designers working on our team. And those first words books are done in such a way whereas obviously, naturally, given that we're kind of aiming for a lot of different children, they are predominantly used by those younger children, but they are very accessible to children who are coming to English but are a little bit older. And it's not that what we try to do there is we don't want to put them off by, maybe for want of a better word, babyish or anything like that. We really do try to, like Emma's kind of just said, make these books inclusive. Vocabulary wise, we do try to progress as well. So as mentioned, our books go to picture books, then we have our first chapter books, which are like short novels. We do put a lot of vocabulary focus in there. Our first chapter books are called Leap into Chapters, and they all have vocabulary pages at the beginning, kind of tricky vocabulary that children might encounter in those books, which are then, like you mentioned, Helen, they're then kind of supported with the supporting resources that come with the books. Almost every book we make has some sort of vocabulary level supporting resource that can be printed or shown on screen. And I suppose the other thing kind of on that is that we are lucky to kind of sit within Twinkl, where there are other teams also making reading materials. So we have got a kind of a structure behind us in which the phonics team, for example, have really spent a lot of time working out which vocabulary is best suited for which kind of level of reading ability, and we can draw on that with what we do as well, and make sure that we've kind of made sure to balance it and make sure there's not too much hard words in there as well. The one other thing I'd mention is when it comes to our longer stories. So even when we're not at that first level of learning English, but children are at a more proficient level, again, just to hark back to our design, we from the very outset of our longer stories, which are like novels, we've always tried to make the design very, very accessible. So we do lots of things like chunked paragraphs, large spaces. We put a lot of time into thinking about the size of the font, words count considerations on a book level, but also a page level. So all that's kind of thought about and considered as well. Don't know if you have anything to add to that, Emma.
Yeah, I suppose I'm thinking a little bit more about the younger children, and how our picture books really help support children who are learning English. And I think when we're talking about the very young children, often what works really well for children who are learning English as their additional language actually works really well for all children, because when you're young, you're quite new to English as well, just because you've been born recently, so you don't know all the words yet. And one of the things that we really are always thinking about all the time is how well the words, the plot, the vocabulary choices that we've made align with the illustrations in the books. We've got wonderful illustrators who work really closely with the writer and the editors. So we're kind of bringing together what the teacher knows about children's understanding of vocabulary at that level, and also making the illustrations tell that story. So if we've got vocabulary that might be a little bit more ambitious, really making sure that the illustration supports that. For example, it might say in the text that someone is feeling content, which might be a little bit of an ambitious word, particularly because it's got that two meanings. Are we talking about being content or the content of something? If we can then see the character sort of smiling serenely, there's real opportunity there for the teacher to kind of, or the educator to point to that, to help the children to infer the meaning. So I think for me, that's like one of the biggest considerations at every stage of the book process for us in terms of supporting all children with, you know, learning English, is just how much does the picture help the children to understand the words as well. I think that's one of the most helpful strategies for the younger learners.
Yeah, I've got a daughter in year 1 and in reception, so they're sort of both learning to read at the moment. And like you say, the illustrations and the Twinkl original books there and how they've been thought through has been so useful. See them straight away looking at that picture as they're trying to, you know, defer the words. That's brilliant strategy. So what strategies, as we're talking about them, do you use to make sure the vocabulary and sentence structures are sort of accessible for children with varying levels of English proficiency? You've touched on it a little bit there. Is there any other strategies?
Yeah, I think, like you say, we've had a good like you say, we've had a good overview there from like Emma in that last question. But one thing to add is that we, especially with the older children, we really do kind of lean on our teachers' experience. So because the team is made up of writers who are all teachers, they do really understand those stages, particularly with fluency, the way to build up sentences, the way to kind of like make sure that a lot of that pedagogical consideration about not overloading vocabulary, not overloading syntax, constructing sentences in, you've kind of got the two best of both worlds really, because you've got them coming from a writer perspective where they're thinking about the craft of writing. So short sentences followed by long sentences, pausing, not overdoing paragraphs, all that stuff that's like a great model for any child learning to read English. But equally, we've also got the more kind of like academic-y kind of side of being a teacher. So they understand where, you know, they can't get away with using this particular paragraph. Or I think we see it with narrative a lot. They understand, you know, a child will get lost in this narrative, especially like, you know, someone learning to read or an EAL reader with our leap into chapter books. Sometimes it's, in my position, it's really tempting to kind of say, wow, let's try this really out there book that's really crazy and written in this really incredible way. But our writers will kind of definitely have that hands-on experience and say, no, you know, perhaps a reader at a certain level will know this, but we've also got to bear in mind these readers at different positions in their proficiency. We also try to build in a lot of the concepts of the tiered vocabulary, the tier 1, 2, and 3 vocabulary. Again, especially as the children get older, we're trying to kind of make a point of making sure that we don't rely too far one end or the other. Spoken with colleagues at kind of secondary level even about, you know, the need to kind of address this tricky tier 2, which I think can be something that EAL children can benefit from when that's in the book and in the writing. So we kind of make conscious efforts as well to hit particular vocabulary that's not too, you know, not too commonplace, not too technical, but in that like Goldilocks zone in the middle of children needing to come across these words often where they might not hear it in everyday speech. So yeah, we try to build that in as well.
I was just going to mention that you know, a couple of, I suppose, things from the government guidance that we sort of bear in mind as well and use to kind of inform what we're making, to make sure that it's, I suppose, relevant to what teachers are looking for now, what they're being advised to use. And so we've got a couple of reports that we're sort of referring to. There's one called Telling the Story, which was the English Education Report from Ofsted that came out in 2024. And I like this quote from that report that says, knowledge of language, including vocabulary, grammar, and syntax, is part of the foundational knowledge needed for reading, speech, and writing. So yes, we know that phonics is the best way to teach children to read words, but it's not the whole picture. And I think that's where listening, well, we really imagine our books being read aloud as being one of the most useful ways to use them. And that's where children will get a lot of that additional context of reading and writing. And the reading framework says about, on that similar theme, that stories are a rich source of language, vocabulary, and syntax. Through listening to repeated readings and talking about what they have heard, the children have multiple exposures to vocabulary and the language of stories. So I suppose, yeah, that's where we think the real, I suppose, educational value of just listening to stories read aloud, that perhaps people aren't always realizing, perhaps it's taken for granted. Like, we sort of know that listening to stories is good, but can we articulate what it's doing, what children are learning, what really core parts of reading, writing, and English are they getting from just listening to stories? And I think that's it. So we kind of keep those key things in mind all the time, that stories really are a really great way to teach language and syntax, which you won't necessarily get just from using phonics alone.
Yeah, that's super important for our listeners, because not always have they got time, or it depends on when the new arrivals arrive, that whether phonics is used or not, especially at that second level with different proficiencies.
And I think time is a big issue. And we know that particularly if you've got, some EAL learners in your class that are going to maybe need a little bit more of that input. Maybe you don't have as much time as you'd like as an educator or a parent to give them that attention. We have audio versions of our books, so those children can potentially, if you've got a book that the whole class is accessing, you've got the option to actually include that child by giving them, an iPad, some headphones. Maybe we've got an app that is really accessible for children at home, particularly if you might have, your parents at home who aren't confident in English yet. You can listen together, or the child can listen to that audio, so they're getting the experience of being read to, even if you haven't necessarily got the adult available to do that.
That is amazing. I didn't realize you had audio for all of them as well. That's brilliant. So that's a great
Sorry, I should say for all of the picture books, but not for all of the novels yet, but watch this space.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, like you say, especially listening at home is brilliant. So you talked at the beginning about being able to immerse yourself in different worlds, look at different cultures through the books. So how do you ensure that your stories are culturally inclusive and relatable to children from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, that is something that is really important to us. And I think one of the main things is accepting that we don't know everything. It's not possible for our team to know everything about every culture and be able to represent that authentically. So it's really been a core part of Originals, really from the start, that when we're representing any culture, we try and work with, well, not try to, we do work with people that have that lived experience. We're really lucky at Twinkl that it's quite a big organization. We have people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, who follow different religions, who are celebrating different cultural experiences, for example. So if we think that children would benefit from a book about that, we work with people that have that experience to make sure that it's authentic, it's accurate. We don't want to misrepresent anyone. We don't want to make readers from that cultural group perhaps feel like we've been tokenistic in that representation. So, for example, one of the first books that we made was called Dragons in the City, and that's about Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, but the family in that are specifically Chinese. And we asked our colleague Na, who's Chinese, if she'd be willing to help us. She's from China, so used to celebrating that in China, not necessarily as a Chinese British person. So she really helped us to convey that family's experience accurately, but also meant that we could include some accurate pronunciation of Mandarin terms, which we just wouldn't have been able to do without seeking those people. So we do that whenever we write about an event like Diwali or Ramadan. We've always tried to seek someone within that group to make sure that it's authentic and it's not going to come across as insincere, I guess, you know, for anyone else reading it. We want them to feel like, yes, this reflects me, this feels right to me. You know, even young children would be able to pick up if, well, that doesn't feel quite right. That we don't actually do that at Ramadan, or, you know, not everyone doesn't celebrate Ramadan in the same way, but we don't want to do anything that just someone from that group would think, that doesn't feel right, that you know. And we try to create complete characters in our stories as well. So even if the detail about a character's background and life might not be mentioned in the story, like, we want to make sure that any incidental details we've got accurate. So, for example, if we are including someone who's Sikh, we might not mention that in the story, but it's really important to us that, you know, they're wearing their kara on the correct arm, for example, or they're wearing the patka or whatever it is that would suit their age, maybe their gender. So yeah, we're trying to make sure all the time that we're just presenting authentic experiences that people would recognize and feel seen, I suppose, hopefully. And it's not just in terms of, you know, cultural diversity. Like, there are so many aspects of inclusion that we're thinking about all the time. Like, we try to avoid showing only wealthy families having, you know, experiences that might cost a lot of money in really large homes. So we try to make sure that anyone could relate to that. You know, we've got children, maybe they're playing with an imaginary friend, or they're having a teddy bear's picnic, or making a snow person, things that we feel like anyone could relate to. And hopefully as many children as possible do feel included when they read our stories.
Definitely, I think it comes across really well. I think we get some lovely feedback on socials, definitely on the EAL socials, where people are, you know, really, really happy that they've been included and they can feel like they're, you know, part of those stories. Twinkl Originals has recently introduced wordless books, which we've been really, really excited about. We've had some great feedback again on the wordless books on our socials recently. How do you see these supporting our EAL learners in developing storytelling, vocabulary and confidence in English?
Yeah, we've been really, it's nice to hear that they've been kind of like well received, because we've been quite excited about them. I think the main kind of way we see these, you know, being used by children and those supporting children is that they provide, by being wordless, they provide a nice kind of low pressure entry point for anybody. It's a book that can be picked up and enjoyed. Again, because it's very interesting how story gets so interwoven, and the experience of enjoying a story is so deep into what we do, that what we find with a wordless book is you take the words out, and I know Emma's team in particular put a lot of thought into which books they choose to do, because once you take the words out, the story can become so different, and you can get a completely different story experience from it, that children kind of really love. Also, though, as a teacher, I mean, the nice thing there is it helps the teacher to scaffold that discussion in a way that suits them, and particularly like the needs of the learner they're working with. So number one, it's like you say, it's that developing storytelling. It's those really, really basic things that come first and foremost to anybody beginning to experience reading and narratives, and everything that comes from that. Again, it's a lovely chance to practice any taught vocabulary that's already been looked at. So an educator can kind of already have put a lot of these vocabulary pre-teaching sessions in place, and then this gives them the chance to kind of use those in practice. And it's very, very kind of like a lot of opportunities around oracy and oral competition. Composition, being able to, you know, share these ideas orally, compose sentences orally. That then ties into writing, doesn't it? Obviously, your first port of call will always be kind of the reading side, but the writing's developing alongside. Just having a really, you know, I'll go back to my other point about talented illustrators and designers who make these incredibly beautiful pictures that are so deep, really can become wonderful prompts for writing. and it just helps to support and extend in all those ways. I think there's an agency in it for children as well, who perhaps up until that point, again, from my own experience, one of the things that a child who's newly arrived can feel so out of place. You joining a class with children who know a lot of these things already, and are, already have kind of all these things that we take for granted about having enjoyed a book, knowing what the book's about. Well, the lovely thing about a wordless book is immediately that child is part of that as well. Then there's no barrier in there whatsoever. And even for not doing any kind of like teaching with it, just for enjoying together, it's it transcends the boundaries kind of thing, and it can be really nice in that way, I think, as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there is just, I think you've probably said it already, but that I suppose it allows the teacher to really tailor the content as well. You can make the sentences that you discover as simple as you need for the level of proficiency, or you can make them more complicated. You can really adapt a wordless book for children from 4 years old up to 12 beyond, maybe, because the only limit is what you bring to it as you co-author the story.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm thinking about using your own home languages as well. It doesn't have to be English, I guess, if they want to use both languages to sort of describe.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, so that's a really good opportunity there. We talked about illustrations and how real talent we've got here at Twinkl to be able to come across with these books. So across your series, how can these illustrations support comprehension and engagement, particularly for our EAL learners?
Yeah, so I think I talked about this earlier. We're particularly in our earliest books, we've got this kind of progression, I suppose, from the first words books, which we imagine are for our youngest learners, or perhaps we know they're very valuable to our SEND audience and also our ESL, EAL, MFL, people that are any audiences really that are new to learning that vocabulary. So we've, from our simplest books, we've got single words, maybe really short phrases that match up really explicitly to the picture. It might say shark, you've got a picture of a shark. But then beyond that, as you're getting into, verbs and adjectives, we want to make sure that those pictures tell the story, help the reader understand. But really as well, the pictures in our picture books, they often do a lot of the narrative. They tell a lot of the story, which I think for children who maybe aren't at the level to understand every single word in the story, they're still able to follow the narrative. They can understand the plot. They can maybe still, from the character's expression, they can see what they're feeling, even if they're maybe at that time not able to understand the words or articulate to their educator or who they're working with what they think the character is feeling. They can still be understanding it. They can still understand the story and take something from the reading, even if not every word is accessible to them yet. And for our slightly older audience, I guess it's a little different, Pete.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, there's a lot of kind of what you've just said there transcends into the kind of longer stories. I think one thing I'd mention here is, again, going back to our Leap into Chapters books that are designed, to bridge that gap between phonics, decoders and longer novels. But one thing we've always tried to do there, going back to the design of a book, like subtly provide breakpoints with the illustrations. They're just in the right position. We put quite a lot of thought into kind of where those illustrations go to reduce that cognitive load, to give those little points as the narrative flows where children can pause, reflect, and think about it. We've also started to experiment a lot more kind of like slightly hybrid-y kind of graphic novel heavy illustration ideas where the images can do the heavy lifting of the story. And we do have a lovely set of comics called Robo Penguins in Space. And that's a really nice sort of entry point where you can see the narrative and text working with the illustrations nicely.
I suppose, yeah, the comics are a great example for EAL learners, where you're balancing between the learning, the developing something, maybe the hard work, all that mental load of maybe decoding and working out and understanding, as well as making sure that they're able to enjoy the experience. You know, there are so many pictures doing such a lot of work for the reader in the comics, that it's a real balance between that engagement and also the learning, the developing the skills that they're working on.
I think I remember those comics coming out. I think I remember sharing them, and I don't think I've reshared them since. I'll have to have a look at those. That you've reminded me.
Oh, definitely, they're so good, and we get some really nice feedback on those. We work with a charity called Bookmark, which works with children who are maybe disadvantaged in certain ways, and they use them a lot with their kind of one-on-one tutoring program that they offer. And they have said that in terms of motivating readers who might struggle with motivation normally, they're fantastic for that, I think. And it just shows you how hard reading can be for some of our learners, and anything we can do to balance that, to take some of that hard work away and bring the enjoyment back in, so they're getting really positive experience of books, is really valuable.
Yeah, I'll take another look at those this week. Especially Robo Penguins, like who can't enjoy that?
Yeah.
So we're thinking about now the most effective ways maybe that teachers can use the Twinkl Originals as part of the curriculum. So in our EAL classrooms around the world, how can we build vocabulary comprehension with these books?
Yeah, I think mainly here, we've covered a few bits of this already, but I think one of the key things is the supporting resources that come around the books. I mean, I'd really definitely recommend when an educator or someone using these books first comes to it, to check out what resources are there. We've mentioned like word maps, but there's also sort of like sequencing and short extracts and things like this. Again, designed with that in building a vocabulary and increasing comprehension, all designed in mind. That's why they exist, sort of thing. So yeah, I think they're fantastic first steps. Some of the resources as well have been designed to support the book as a kind of like overview of the book. Like we on Key Stage 2 have got our resources called Adult Guidance, and they'll give you a quick like rundown of what vocab you could expect to find, and some key kind of discussion questions. I know Emma's team will work quite hard to get some new versions of those types of resources up, and they're great for like pre-teaching vocab and doing that sort of thing. Other ways I think work really well in kind of EAL classrooms would be paired peer reading. I think that again is where some of the things like our Leap into Chapters or Wordless books come in, because they've got that accessible entry point. And we've spoken at length about how much we try to make them engaging, but I think if you paired peer reading, you've got the fact that neither of those children in the pair are going to be missing out or not taking something from what you're reading, because it's designed in that way. And yeah, again, similarly, we've always, one of our key kind of like go-to slogans is kind of, especially for Leap into Chapters, like rereading engaging page turners, taking that straight from the reading framework of engaging page turners, and we've really tried to run with that. So I think as well, the chance to have these books to be reread and enjoyed is really helpful and important thing that can be used.
Yes, I would just build on what Pete's saying. I suppose the drum that I always want to bang is just the best thing you can do with our books, I think, for all children, is to read them aloud. To children of all ages, I think that sometimes people forget or struggle to see the value of reading to children once they start to read for themselves. So it trails off maybe in year 1, year 2, we see much less reading aloud. But all children right up to Key Stage 2 and even beyond will continue to benefit so much from listening to books being read aloud. Even if children, maybe EAL isn't a barrier, but we know that reading aloud contributes to fluency. For example, you're hearing what a fluent reader looks like, you're hearing how they use punctuation. And when you're reading alone for yourself and you encounter a new word, there really isn't many ways that you can know how to pronounce those words unless you're hearing them. I was telling Pete yesterday about it's a little anecdote about an adult, and I love the expression that some people, I can't remember who came up with it originally, but that you can always tell a reader if they pronounce words wrong. So rather than, I don't know, linking some kind of embarrassment to not knowing how to pronounce words, I think it's a sign that actually you're learning all the time, you're reading, you're learning from what you read, but you haven't necessarily heard those words in conversation. And I actually had an adult friend who was talking about archipelago, and what they meant was archipelago, like a complex geographical term that maybe he'd not heard before. And that can happen to us as adults, you know, if we're reading unfamiliar vocabulary. And that's where the benefit of hearing someone, even, you know, if you're learning phonics and you're new to English and you're trying to decode the word bread, how do you know that it's pronounced bread and not breed? Because both of those phonetic correspondences to that grapheme, EA, are used. They're acceptable. They make sense. How do you know unless you're hearing it? So I would say the most useful strategy to all teachers, but yeah, those working with EAL learners, is read to them, discuss the books, read to them, let them hear you.
Definitely. And some of your books are like the PowerPoint versions, aren't they, where you could do it as like a whole class? You could have it on the board. Is that right? Yeah. So you could have them reading together visuals.
We've got the ebooks, which you can put on the screens or you can read on tablets. We've got the app that you can use at home or maybe as a more personalized experience on a phone, even if that's what's available. We've got the PowerPoints. We often make for our Key Stage 1 books guided reading PowerPoints as well. So maybe if you are a little bit pushed for time in your planning, it provides some questions that might guide you to, well, let's dig a little bit deeper into the meaning of this word, or let's have a little look at inference there. And also, I suppose, just thinking about the other resources that we have, I think activating prior knowledge, I think, is really important when you're reading. I think sometimes just providing the opportunity for children to stay in the learning or the comfort they might have developed with a book that you've become really familiar with, or a topic that you're learning about, rather than rushing away from that to a new topic. If you can stay in that zone, say for example you've read a book about transport that's a story, you can maybe then go on to a non-fiction book about transport, and those will work together. So rather than feeling maybe overwhelmed by new learning all the time, they get a little bit of opportunity to kind of embed some of that vocabulary and the knowledge they've just picked up, practice it, reuse it, and maybe feel a little bit more like some other children might feel when coming to a topic that they're familiar with from the jump, if that makes sense. And also in terms of the supporting resources, again, you might, so for example, we've got a book about birds hatching from eggs, and there's maybe some vocabulary there, some science learning that we can't take for granted that children even know that birds hatch from eggs. So we've got like a supporting non-fiction PowerPoint that goes with that, and it's so full of photos and images to support. So rather than just explaining to children with your words, oh, birds hatch from eggs, and they're like, okay, they can see what that means. And I think that sort of thing really helps as well. And then you can maybe go back to that book that you've read about birds, and you've got some more knowledge that they can bring for the next reading. And like I was just thinking with the eggs, in the ideal world, maybe you'd bring in those chicks that are hatching in your class. You know, that's one of the most wonderful experiences I think that happens in schools. Whenever I've been in a school and they have chicks hatching, and you just see children being so gentle, and there is nothing better than if you can bring a real life experience in to make the meaning of the books make sense. But failing that, use our supporting resources with lots of pictures. That's the second best.
Yeah, we talk about sending things home as well for EL learners. So I'm thinking about those supporting resources that can go home before the book, after the book, discussing it at home, again, translating to their home languages, being able to communicate with the parents about these stories as well is just brilliant. So we've talked to other educators. We've got feedback. I know from our socials is where I mainly speak to our customers. But what have you learned from teachers or educators you've spoken to who use Twinkl Originals with EAL students, and how has this shaped the development of any new titles? you've come up with?
I'll start by talking about our customers and what they tell us they need. Often the way that we know how teachers are using our books is what they request from us. And we've had, I suppose, when we first started making our first word range, we probably had very, very young children learning everyday vocabulary in mind. So we started with books about colours and clothes, the kind of language that you need for kind of the more basic everyday life communication. But the requests that we get actually are now for like key topic vocabulary. So people want a book about desert animals, for example, because that might be a topic that they're focusing on as a habitat, or the Arctic. We know polar regions is covered a lot because it's just so that kind of thing. But teachers are finding the books so useful for teaching vocabulary that they're wanting them as I suppose, a really firm foundation for the youngest children, but also the children that might be learning English. So you start with what do these words mean, but in a fun, bright, appealing context. And then you've got that kind of foundation for when you go through the school and you might learn a little bit more in detail, the geography aspect of the polar regions. You bring in the next level of vocabulary, but we start with the basics, and that's, I think, what people are really wanting from us for first words at the moment. That core firm foundation in a wide range of topics that they're teaching, and also in terms of what we're learning from teachers, I suppose we're also learning from the children. So we've got kind of two kind of customers in mind, haven't we? We've got the adults and we've got the children. And I suppose some of what we've learned that's been really valuable is from going into schools recently. Like Pete and I have been very lucky that schools have allowed us to come in. They've trusted us to have their classes' attention for a little while and read to them. And I was reading a couple of books that have repeated refrains, actually, A Monster Surprise and The Grumpy Old Stone. And I was really fascinated by how quickly children picked up on the refrain, joined in. There was one boy in the front row that was kind of like egging his friends on and kind of like, bringing them into this core reading. And that wasn't just EAL children, it was a diverse mix of children, including some who would be EAL. But I think just that the benefit of the repetition, we knew that repetition was good, but to see it and have that reminder in real life of, I suppose, our core customer, the children, the young reader, how effective it is and how much it can engage them, really made me think we need to do a lot more of that. So that's one thing that I've definitely learned: more repetition, more repeated refrains, more opportunities for the reader to join in and feel like they're a part of the story, I suppose, is a magical thing when you're reading to them. Pete, what did you learn from your visit?
Yeah, one thing I suppose to add is what I kind of picked up, because when I've been on one occasion, I read to both children and parents, and there was a bit of a mix again of kind of like parents of EAL children in there, and it did make me think about, when we make books, to consider the fact that there's a secondary audience of parents who are enjoying the book alongside the book, alongside the children, but also I think invited them in to sort of see how this book's been, how a child might enjoy the book, how me as a kind of reader of a book would do it, to help sort of model that for parents as well. And that's something we now think about. It's kind of just opened my eyes slightly to making sure we develop titles for the parents market as well as the educators market, which is something quite interesting that came about from that.
I suppose that I suppose was a reminder that parents might lack a little bit of confidence, all parents, I think, in how you discuss a book with children, and that idea that school had of bringing the teachers in to see what a class read looks like, what class discussion looks like, was really valuable. So I suppose thinking about how we might make resources that can support that as well when we're making our guidance, I suppose thinking about who it's for and how we can tailor it.
We've created in the EAL team like bookmarks, sometimes with vocabulary or questions and things that you could just like slot in as part of like sending it home and things. Mm-hmm. So that sometimes an option for our EAL learners, just to have that little reminder for the parents maybe, or a starting point for discussion. So many EAL learners benefit from multimodal approaches. How do Twinkl Originals link with sort of drama, art, or digital tools to deepen that engagement?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the bit I'd hook onto there is with the digital tools, because we're kind of like first and foremost ebooks, and we do have our Originals app as well, which again, like with many things, has been really designed to support as many different types of learners as we can. Key thing I think for EAL with the Twinkl Originals app is that the design is so that it's a self-contained app that a child can navigate themselves. So it's supposed to be a kind of library in their pocket that they can take around with them. As part of that, the app's got the audio we've mentioned is all kind of there at a click of a button. There's a read to me feature, which we call like listen and follow. So they can have the words in front of them, the pages turning, and somebody like a professional voice artist reading the book to them. Goes back to Emma's thing about reading aloud. I think that's definitely a key thing I think there. But also we like many apps these days, there's kind of like bits of gamification and awards in there, so it's quizzes and colouring afterwards and stuff like that, which engages the children too. And on site we also have you can search all of our picture books, and if you search the title of the book and write ebooks with audio, we've got the same thing on site, so you can download the ebooks where there's somebody reading to you as well. Emma, have you got anything to add on to that bit?
I suppose, one of the things you've already touched on, I suppose, is about this multimodal approach, is that we love print books, but we love digital, and there's no one size fits all. And lots of children, for lots of different reasons, learn best in different ways. Some children maybe do respond better when learning from a printed book, but we know from research that that isn't true of everyone. One of the things that informs some of our practice is a report called The Impact of eBooks on Young Children. And there is a lot of debate. We actually did loads of research on whether digital or print reading is better for children, and there is no definitive answer to that, because it really does depend on the child, depends on the type of reading, it depends how the resource is used, etc. So really trying as educators and as parents, trying to think of an approach to reading that includes both digital and print is probably going to be the most suitable for most people. And actually, specifically in that report, it mentions that English language learners benefited from ebook interventions, which highly improved their literacy skills, which I wouldn't think people would necessarily assume, but actually, like, digital learning can be so useful for certain groups, and it seems for children who are learning English. And a second thing that I would just mention is, I suppose, the popularity and the benefit of our animations. I think watching an animated version of a book is such an engaging way to increase children's familiarity with a story. They can hear, again, in context, those words that they have read, they're getting that pronunciation again. And we're reducing the amount of their working memory that they're maybe taking up with decoding. They can develop their understanding of what they just read, maybe if you're watching the animation afterwards, and it supports future readings. Again, like when I think I mentioned earlier that you can read the book, use another resource, return to the book, build that familiarity, stay in the comfort zone for a minute, let the children feel confident before moving on. And children want to watch animations. I think, you can fight against the modern world, or you can embrace it, and you can think children are used to animations, they love cartoons, they're all the time experiencing this multimedia approach. And if using an animated version of a story, perhaps even before you read it, is going to engage those children, make them feel more in their comfort zone, make them feel more ready to read, then use it, embrace it, use animations, let them enjoy them, and know that they're learning from animations. Just because it's a video, it doesn't mean it's not reading. It's just as important. It can really support their reading and their learning. It doesn't necessarily take away from it.
Definitely. I mean, Julie Donaldson's a firm favourite in our house, and watching the Gruffalo and Stickman and all the animations, they can read along then as well, can't they? Yeah,
there is nothing better at Christmas than the new Julia Donaldson animations. They're so beautifully done. But yeah, I think that they would make so many children feel more passionate about reading those books. So I suppose, yeah, we're trying to be Julia. We want people to watch our videos too.
What exciting projects or upcoming stories can we expect from the Twinkl Originals team in the next sort of 12 months?
So on my team, on the 0 to 7 team, I think, as I mentioned before, we're really trying to work on those requests for first words that are very popular with our EAL segment. So upcoming books that we've had direct requests from our lovely customers for are new vocabulary books on ponds, polar regions, forest, and the desert. So we're going to be working on all of those over the next year. And we're also releasing a new book that supports comparative language, which is a first for us. So it's comparing, for example, big, bigger, biggest, narrow, narrower, narrowest, but with a really engaging narrative and clear visuals to support those words. So I think, again, like a lot of what we do, really beneficial to all learners, but that sort of focus on teaching language and vocabulary explicitly, probably really good for the EAL audience. Pete?
Yeah, we're working on, so mentioned a lot about vocabulary, but we're working on some more resources to accompany our books that look at those tiered vocabulary aspects. And also we're trying to, take the content of the stories in a direction that kind of looks at topic vocabulary and, heavily topic kind of areas, but through the lens of a child's experience. So trying to work really hard on storytelling in that way. One that I'm really excited about as well that we're working on, we're trying to kind of make a few more shorter stories, so short stories for use in the Key Stage 2 classroom, to try and kind of mimic that end of the day story time thing, and also to put a lot more kind of like illustrations into them.
I love that when I was teaching that end of day story time. It's like literally time of the day.
Yeah, and it's missing.
Quiet and they just all come together. It's just
it's what stories are all about, isn't it? And it's so quick for it to drop away from year 3 onwards. Well, even year 2, to be fair. And yeah, so we really want to try and make something now that allows that to still exist. That kind of one sitting story, not always like a little bit of the class reader, but just for once, we're just going to have this story and it's just here to be enjoyed. There's nothing more to it. So we're going to try and make a few more of those. It's worth mentioning as well our colleagues in Australia. So there is an arm of Twinkl Originals in Australia, and they've made some interesting first words books that are dual language. So they've got a lot of the first word books that show, I think there's French, Italian, Indonesian, and Japanese. So one of the books, for example, like Let's Name the Shapes, and they've got it in dual language. Those are all available on the site as well now, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, that'd be really, really exciting. We always have requests for dual language books. That'll be definitely worth our market looking at.
And in terms of reading aloud, I would just say it's not just us that wants you to read our books in Key Stage 2. It's the recommendation of the DFE. They're really clear in their reading framework. And I want everyone to read this part of the reading framework, or remember that I'm saying it. The recommendation is to do at least 4 times a week story time for 20 minutes a day. And that's at Key Stage 2, not just Key Stage 1. So get our books, read them, and know that that's what the DFE wants you to do. It's not just us saying it.
Yeah. Definitely a great note on there. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I've had a real insight into Twinkl Originals, how they're made. I think it's the process behind it and everything's so interesting. And I don't think sometimes people take that into account. They'll just get it off the shelf and not think anything more of it. But there's a huge, huge team that are all really thinking about every single book and every single word that's on the page. And that's been brilliant to hear about today. Have you got any other final notes?
Just to mention, I suppose we've mentioned customer requests. If anyone listening to this does have anything that they want to book about, or they've got a great idea or a topic that we haven't covered, let us know. Always happy to hear directly from our customers and work on that.
Definitely. I'll put the links in the bio as well for our Twinkl Cares team. You can get in touch there with those ideas, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you both.
Thanks very much, Helen.
Cheers, Helen.